President Obama wrote a piece in the Huffington Post that is on specifically a topic that you have been working on, I believe professionally. I don't know. I think you told us that. At
Yes.
least that's what was in my head. That you were working with Nick Hanauer, as well as obviously a lot of other people, working on this issue of overtime pay. Just lay it out for us. I mean, how it is. There are federal regulations. There's obviously labor standards, labor laws, but then the labor laws basically create the legal authority for the Department of Labor to determine who is eligible, not specifically who, but at what income level one is eligible and becomes ineligible for overtime. Tell us how this all developed and where it's been.
Yeah, well, let me start by saying I have been working, helping, as I call it, I guess, a political advisor and doing some public relations work with Nick. And I know you've interviewed him, Sam. He's fantastic because he's the real deal, and he doesn't really care what insiders, quote unquote, think. He lives in Seattle. He fights for the things that he thinks are right, and he's quite progressive, obviously. And so when I got that opportunity to work with him, I was excited about it. Yeah, there's certainly the Senate, Center for American Progress has done great work on this. Robert Reif has done great work on this. Move On. So no, it's not to take any credit and say, oh, well, this was us. But we had a very strong game plan of making sure we got this information out there and how we got it out there, and I felt really good about it. And we heard feedback at the White House to what we and other people were doing was paying attention. And so that leads me to sort of the explanation of what exactly happened. So what you're looking at, and I think most of the time, if we look at where the middle class based economy of the United States, the strong shared prosperity of the post-war period in the latter half of the 20th century, where that started running in different directions and going south, so to speak. Always you'll find yourself in the mid to late 1970s. Where the last time where things were where they should be, because that guy we elected in 1980, I can't remember his name. Grover Norquist could probably tell me. So, 1975, I believe was the last time we had adjusted this for inflation. So back then, $23,660 meant something a lot different than it does. 40 years later.
So wait a sec. Let's just be clear with people. I want to catch everybody up here. So when you say 23,660, it means
that was the level above which you were not guaranteed overtime. You were only guaranteed to get paid overtime legally up if you make an income or on income up to that level.
So you're an hourly wage worker. You make up to $455 a week. If you make less than $455 a week, you can qualify for overtime. And obviously, somebody could write it into their contract, but they don't.
Well, it's a rule. So they would be breaking that rule, which has the force of law behind it, if they're not paying it to you. If you make up to that amount, they are supposed to be paying you overtime, time and a half for every hour you work over 40 hours a week. And the average American works 47 hours a week these days. So I think we can figure out that there are a lot of people who are losing a lot of overtime. We advocated for tripling that threshold up to about 69,000. Why? Because with inflation, that was what you would take to have it cover the same number of people that were being covered back then. And that was, I think, let's call this example, Sam, and we've had the conversation on this show, of not starting off by negotiating with yourself.
Right.
I'm not sure we thought, we would have loved it if 69,000 become the number. That would obviously be a huge increase. I don't know if any of us expected them to go the full way, but by starting up there and having that be a legitimate place to start, because it would be where things were when we last made a change. We were able to sort of get a lot of people involved. Sherrod Brown and Elizabeth Warren and others got involved arguing for this. A lot of progressive pundits did. And some of the folks I named earlier. And so the number we originally heard was 42, and we, obviously that's a big improvement from 23, but not where we wanted to be. And then we suddenly were hearing things more like 45. But in the end, we got over $50,000. I can't remember the exact dollar number, but it's 50,000 something, 600, something like that.
50,440, I think it was.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so what that means is 5 million more people now will be eligible. And as Robert Reich and Nick argued in their most recent op-ed in Medium, that essentially they refer to this as this is like the minimum wage. What the minimum wage is to working people, this is to the middle class. Because we're talking now about people in the middle of the spectrum and the income levels we're covering. Who will get a big raise from this, and so conservatives will attack it and say, oh well, then here's what's going to happen. Then they're just not going to let people work above that number of hours. They're going to adjust around it. Well, they can, right? They can either just not have the work done, or they solve another problem. Not that it's as big a problem anymore, especially seeing that unemployment is at 5.3% today. But there's a lot of people, as we know, who still have given up looking for jobs and aren't even out there, and they don't get counted in the unemployment, or people who are underemployed. And so if they bring in new workers, then there's other people who are making money. And the key here is that while corporate profits have gone through the roof, wages have fallen. This is one of the reasons that's occurred. And corporate profits get stashed in a bank in the Grand Caymans, while someone who's making, $48,000 a year is going to spend that money on things which is going to create more jobs. I mean, it's a virtuous cycle, and it makes sense. So obviously, the conservative complaints about this are ridiculous. Corporate profits are enormous. Corporations can afford to do this, and by doing this, you're putting money back in the economy, and you're putting it you're bolstering that middle class, which is what a great economy has always been based around. And so we consider this, look, I would have loved it if it was 60, right? Hell, I'd love it if it was 51. I mean, I'd like it to be anything more than it is. But when you think of from 23, I mean, it's being more than doubled. That's a pretty good day as far as I'm concerned. So we're really happy with that outcome.
Yeah, this is, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, it hopefully will also put, because of that same thing, like, look, if people say like, okay, we're not going to pay for overtime for workers, we don't want to get into that time and a half stuff, we're going to have to hire more people. You hire more people, it puts upward pressure on wages. I mean, that's just sort of the bottom line, right? Because if I'm a worker, let's say, a lot of these people, if you're making you're making $23,000 a year. You're in minimum wage territory, depending on what state it is, and so if I'm looking at, let's say, $8, $9, $10 an hour for a worker, and time and a half is going to put that to $12 or $13 or $15 an hour. Somewhere between those two numbers, right, is where you start getting the wage pressure. Because if I'm looking for a new worker to fill that role, it's going to start to create an increase in pay, because I know that the options, I don't know, but I'm saying that in terms of the way that this is going to work, the options for that employer are either $15 an hour, assuming it's a $10 wage earner, or somewhere in between, right? And so, I think it's a good thing, and I think, like you say, it doesn't go as high a threshold, but it's just one more sort of, I guess,
it's a victory.
Yep.
We'd like more, but it's a victory. And I think the second great point that I would take from this, which I'll say quickly, is, again, working with Hanauer and his group of people, and there's some great people. Some people know David Goldstein, who used to write for, had a blog that was a big blog out in Seattle and Washington called Horse's Ass,
right,
which is a fantastic name, too. He used to be a radio host out there, too. He's been on the scene for a while. He's helping advise Nick. There's some great progressive people behind this. And I think, to me, a good story, Zach Silk, also, who ran the marriage equality campaign there on the ballot in Washington that won. I think that the story here is, when Washington, D.C. isn't working, ideas can come from outside of Washington and can force Washington to change. It can force the states to change. This group of people I'm talking about were the ones who also, again, not just them, but with others who are stakeholders, got together and started pushing the minimum wage to be $15 in Seattle. I mean, that's where it began. And of course, people said that's crazy. That's never going to happen. Meanwhile, it's on a path to hit 15 by, I don't know, 2017 or something in Seattle. They did it, and they did it in San Francisco. And I guess New York, right, and LA, and they did it in LA. I think New York and Chicago should to go up to 13, if I'm right, or maybe I'm wrong about New York. I know Chicago, I just read, is over the next sort of couple of years. I mean, this is what forced these minimum wages to go up, and now you've got overtime. I guess I'm just saying that people, we all get discouraged, but you can make a difference outside of Washington, D.C. by pushing for these things. Get out there, make some noise, and organize yourselves and do some smart things, and you never know what will happen. So that's a pretty good feeling, too.